All right. Welcome back to the Loud Sound Epicenter podcast. Of course, as always, we are joined by the shaman himself, Thomas777, and our favorite buddy, our poet, writer, and Rush appreciator, Paul Fahrenheit. Thank you for returning.
Yes,
And
sir.
that's right. That's right. And for today's episode, we got a topic thanks to Academic Agent on Twitter, was nice enough to recommend a subject that many people older than me might remember, and that is the moral panic of the 1980s that made the rounds on American TV, British journalism, and probably other avenues I'm not aware of. People like Oprah and political women were spreading awareness on the state of pop culture, music, movies, and because after the big band era, things like the British invasion, including our favorite band on the show, the Beatles, as you know, they were blowing the doors wide open on the Overton window for music and movies, reaching an audience to younger people in a much more intimate fashion and more effectively without being beholden to a standard like the Hays Code for movies, for example. And because of that, we have moments like the moral panic of the 80s that might seem kind of hokey back in their day. And because this is kind of the early incarnation of the mass media of the 80s, you have moments like the British counterpart of the video Nasties and so on. So, for me personally, I think the first aspect I'd like to delve into to get us started off is the Tipper Gore and the TV talking heads. I think we're being confronted by the counterculture now that they had families because they were of age and they were starting to see the American decline, like the American decline that they ushered in the 1960s with the counterculture, sexual revolution, etc. And I want to pass it over to Thomas since you probably have some memories of this stuff.
Yeah, it was pretty. Well, there's a few things going on there. First and foremost, part of it was moral panic. Always, just in every epoch, there's some variant of it. Okay, like these days, it's particularly strange because it's so rigidly ideological. Like these days, the moral panic narrative is that like, oh, you're a racist, or like there's racist things being insinuated, or you're anti-gay, or you're not tolerant of people in a way that honors their dignity and stuff. But it was very, very different, 40 years ago, like 30 years ago. And the as you know, like one of the things that underlay like Tipper Gore and the PMRC, for those people who don't know, that was the Parents Musical Resource Center. Um in ancient times, when you go to the record store to buy tapes, like little tapes or CDs, the PMRC, they managed to get their way, and these stickers were slapped on on tapes and CDs that were parental advisory. If there was bad language or like violent motifs and stuff. So I mean, like the primary targets was gangster rap and metal. They really hated Wasp, which is kind of weird, man, because like Wasp is, I mean, yeah, there was like some kind of raunchy lyrics, but they were pretty tame, man, especially compared to something like Slayer. Okay, I mean, like, but I think it was because Wasp was like making, it was making the rounds on MTV and shit. But in any event, so I mean, part of this was just kind of typical, uh, typical, typical Karen type, outrage at sex and bad language type stuff. I mean, then that's like normal. Like I said, every epoch has an iteration of that. But there were some very strange things afoot post Vietnam in the American culture. And that like what Academic Agent, our dear friend, and comrade, he specifically suggested we talk about Satanic Panic. Now, what's known these days and kind of punitive, it casts shade on it to call it Satanic Panic, because the inference you're supposed to draw is that this was just some kind of paranoiac delusion of crazy Karens, or like church people or something. And I mean, don't get me wrong, there was definitely an element of hysteria to it, but what underlay kind of this whole every aspect of the censorship culture was this idea that there was something very sinister in the culture, and that was not entirely incorrect. Okay, I can't adequately convey this to younger people, but there was weird things going on in the mid to late 80s. And my my dad was an economist who was working in national defense and other very worldly things. And my mom was a worldly person, and I grew up on a super zip. It's not like I lived in some like hillbilly zip code, and I discern this, and like everybody did. And I remember E. Michael Jones makes the point that in the 70s and 80s, suddenly there was this fixation in Hollywood with occultism, like Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist. In the 80s, the big kind of one of the most kind of big controversial satanic themed films was the Unholy. There's all these kind of prime symbols emerging related to not just to kind of corny Satanism, but also like occult beliefs and primitive kind of barbaric practices. Almost like atavistic stuff. Like there's a film with Martin Sheen called The Believers about this like Santeria type cult that takes root in Manhattan, and they start practicing human sacrifice, and these kinds of rootless cosmopolitans get drawn into it. Like, oh, this is really onto something. Like the kind of people would be into astrology. Like you start getting into this really sinister, like murderous stuff. Is the theme of the movie, and there's actually kind of a smart movie because I don't think that's entirely far fetched in some context.
Well, that's
But in
not
any
good
event,
because I'm into astrology, so I don't know if I'm getting into human sacrifice anytime soon.
no. But what I mean is that there's a certain type, and like the same kinds of people, like they'll start off getting into kind of like weird, like Kerry Mullis, the Nobel Prize winner, and the arch nemesis of Fauci when he was alive. He put some stock in astrology. I'm not saying it's I'm not saying like it's all like nonsense. What I'm saying is there's a certain type of person who gets into like strange kind of new age belief structures. These kinds of people who become like Scientologists, or the kinds of people who like can't take a piss in the morning without like making a star chart. I'm talking about those types.
Yeah.
And they're very malleable and kind of gullible. But so there was that, like in the culture, but also, despite what this kind of revisionist, not revisionist like of the sort of a methodology that we practice. What I mean is like revisionist of people kind of selectively remembering the past and and redacting certain facts that don't fit with their narrative. There were people doing horribly violent, depraved things in that epoch, and they were doing it for what they claimed were satanic or occult reasons. This was happening all over the country. It wasn't some kind of epidemic, but it was occurring. Like here in Chicago, there's this guy named Robin Gecht, and him and his friends, they were these sex fiend kill freaks. And I'm not even going to relay like what they did. It's so disgusting. But they came known as the Ripper Crew by Chicago PD because if you know anything about Jack the Ripper, they were doing similar kinds of stuff. Okay, I mean it's nauseating. And Gecht considered himself a Satanist. Like that's what he said he was. Okay. You had Richard Ramirez. I think Ramirez is a bit more of a complicated case. I think Ramirez is one of these kinds of Mexican guys who got in, and I'm not like trashing mestizos, but there is an atavistic tendency among them. That's why cartel guys, pray to Santa Muerta. That's a thing. I think Ramirez was one of those types going off the rails totally, and the way it was kind of interpreted in shorthand was as Satanism. But the point is, like he very much believed in like occultic forces. You had these kids in Missouri, Grand Junction, I think, and they murdered their buddy in this grotesque way, and they all like stipulated. I mean, this was after they pled guilty and everything, so it wasn't some kind of, they weren't trying to piece together a narrative for an insanity plea. They said very like, yeah, we believed in, like that you could access like deities, like malevolent deities and other dimensions and things. And that, if you, this whole kind of like Lovecraftian mythology that seems like very half-baked, but teenagers think weird things. But the point is, they ritualistically slaughtered their friend for the sake of, acquiring power, like from this ritualized practice. And even before that, you had the David Berkowitz rampage, and Berkowitz, it's, Maury Terry wrote an entire book called The Ultimate Evil, and that was turned into a Netflix series, which is a great series. I don't like Netflix or anything like that, but Terry was ridiculed at the time as some kind of crank or something, or some Art Bell type. But now it's becoming clearer and clearer. Everything he said was correct. And I mean, basically what Terry uncovered was that, if you want to understand Berkowitz, if you want to understand Charles Manson and his family, the origins of both of those things, they both belong to cults. Okay, is in short. And the Manson case is complicated because I think that Manson's people, like Tex Watson and the girls, I think they murdered some of those people just for because they got burned, like in a fucking dope deal. But it's so complicated. But they were cult members. And if you're familiar with Aleister Crowley, in one of his acolytes in America, became acquainted with a guy named Jack Parsons, who was an early kind of pioneer in rocketry, like applied engineering rocketry, which is very strange that a guy like Parsons would gravitate to this. But Parsons was this big Crowleyite type in the 1930s and 40s, and he was a good buddy of L. Ron Hubbard. Okay, so like L. Ron Hubbard was basically an occultist, and then he confabulated his whole Scientology thing. The short version is that from Scientology, there was this offshoot. The Process Church, the Final Judgment, was essentially an offshoot of Scientology. It came from the same milieu. Then there was an offshoot of the Process Church, the Final Judgment, called the Children. And then there was yet another offshoot of that was this violent cult that had this idea that, by going out and quite literally sacrificing people, and fermenting chaos, you could, like a kind of race war could be sparked, and the kind of Kali Yuga can be sped up. And what would emerge later, in its wake, is that this kind of the superior kind of species of man, this kind of half-baked Nietzschean notion of like this predatory man who is fit to rule, and simply those are the kind of flabby like normies that are left alive. He can just exploit sexually, or as labor slaves, or just to murder it or do whatever he wants with, like on his own whims. It's very nuts. But and the one of the things that this Berkowitz cult that the Manson people also like were in common, like partook of, they had this very strange fixation with animals. Because they viewed man as just kind of like this, the most evolved animal, kind of like the apex predator. So and German shepherds were big on like German shepherds or some kind of totem animal. And that's why in like a lot of the Berkowitz letters, like whoever wrote them, and I think many people did, it's like written from the perspective of a dog. Okay, like this is really, really, really weird. And incidentally, like the Process Church, the Final Judgment, it reincorporated as the Best Friends Animal Shelter, which is this very wealthy. It's got a very high wealthy endowment, but it's like this animal rights charity. Okay, I mean, this is I'm not just speculating. This is all like you can get the documentation of this with like a fucking Google search, But it's so, I mean, all this stuff. This stuff was not just thing. This was very real. Okay, I mean, I realize it sounds totally insane, but it, I'm a Hegelian, and I believe very much in zeitgeist, obviously, and I'm also something of I'm more of a Carl Jaspers guy than a Jungian, but I put a very heavy emphasis on symbolic psychology. Okay. And these things come to characterize epochs, and you can. There is something of a collective subconscious. Okay, when there's really, really strange things afoot like this, owing to kind of the punctuated disturbances of modernity or alienation or whatever, just kind of people like losing their minds for whatever reason, it takes really strange forms, and even people who aren't attracted to it and aren't like engaging with it, they detect it. and it becomes like a thing. Okay, I mean, not for any like mystical reason, but just for the reasons I said. Like they were like thought, it becomes uh something of something participated in by the commons, if that makes any sense. Okay. um so that's part of what Satanic Panic derived from. It was not just like these crazy Karens like saying like, oh, Blackie Lawless, grabbed his balls on stage, and that that makes girls blush, and and makes boys into homosexuals. Like, yeah, that was like part of it, but it there was something afoot in the culture that was frightening these people as well. And I mean, yeah, obviously stupid people like Tipper Gore, they were exploiting this for cynical reasons, but also they're just like too dumb to really get a handle on what really was underway. But I'm gonna go over to you guys for a minute because I gotta refill my coffee, if you'll excuse me.
Of
But yeah,
course.
you guys go. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to speak on that disparity difference between WASP and a lot of the a lot of the serious counterpart to that. I just find it so frustrating when people say things like, this is what they said about Elvis Presley and the Beatles. And I think I mentioned on a previous show, if you're like a 1950s parent and the Beatles literally like foreign influence onto your American culture, like that dynamic is unforeseen. Like the fact that, as I said at the beginning, the music is reaching kids on an intimate level outside of the big band, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin. I mean, that is cause for concern, and it's totally warranted to have this kind of like helicopter parent mentality that we've kind of been desensitized to. But the thing that they were trying to bring a voice to was the fact that there is supposed to be this cooperation between the state, which is not supposed to be secular, to quote like Russell Kirk. You're supposed to have a state that reinforces morality. And so I know today a lot of people stick their nose up at that concept, but again, we're looking back at a culture. I mean, this is something that we would want today. This is the, the CRT type type of awareness that kind of gets minimized in the media. It's the exact same thing that Tipper Gore and the Washington Wives were treated back in the day. And as Thomas said, all those examples he listed, those aren't isolated cases. When you have stuff like that happening in the 70s and the 80s, there is, probable cause for this not being just, just one little thing. And as somebody in the comments brought up, this bled into the 90s, and the 90s is the ultimate litmus test to say that the 80s was not just alarmist. You had Woodstock 99, the trash TV, media getting decentralized, therefore becoming secular, and that connection is very prominent in the 90s. So the fact that this is all just, 80s hysteria, and I'm not talking about the Def Leppard album. I mean, you have multiple examples that this is a very, serious phenomenon. And I just
What's interesting about this whole thing, and someone in the comments was also talking about the weird sort of military intelligence connection to the Texarkana Moonlight murders. And yeah, this is true. Like all this stuff we're talking about, the Satanic Panic, right? The heavy metal, Aleister Crowley, all these occultist type scenes, they all kind of bleed together, right? And I don't know if it's just by virtue of the fact that these are all esoteric topics, but the intelligence world is tied to this sort of shit. Like you can't do any study of the intelligence world during the Cold War up into the 80s without sort of getting into this kind of esoteric stuff. Even people like Crowley himself was likely an intelligence asset for the British government, as were several of his friends. And what was mentioned earlier was I forget his name. The gentleman that you said was well, no, it was Crowley's friend who knew L. Ron Hubbard, who was the gentleman who pioneered rockets.
Parsons.
That you mentioned. Parsons, yeah.
Jack Parsons.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And Paperclip, where which brought over a lot of these guys that started, kickstarted the U.S. rocketry program. I'm pretty sure Parsons worked with correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas, because you know more about this than I do, but I believe he worked with von Braun and other such people. And the guys whose names we don't know who were brought over in Paperclip, right? But all of this kind of ties together, and I think it kind of as the time went on into the 80s, and we might talk about this later on in the stream, but like this kind of seeped into the military and intelligence structure, right? Like this was very much like a group of people who were kind of like Crowleyites or other sort of esoteric sex, and you know, this is whenever you look at all of this sort of stuff and you start connecting the dots, and you look at, you know, guy in the comments mentioned the Texarkana Moonlight murders. Well, there's other murders too, right? That are oddly adjacent to MK Ultra projects.
Well,
So
I wanted to just insinuate real quick. You know, one of the things that was incredible to me is that the people who said, going back to Berkowitz, when people were saying that Berkowitz was just, you know, because originally Berkowitz he just copped to everything, and he made up this asinine theory that he was like schizophrenic. But then when he started talking to Terry, Maury Terry's like, well, give me something. Like, I can't just take your word for it. There's this cult. And so what Berkowitz did was he said, like, well, take the Arliss Perry murder. And Berkowitz knew all about Arliss Perry, and she was this poor girl who got murdered in a church in Berkeley, or in Stanford. And like, her body was desecrated, and you know, the sacramental candles and stuff were, I'm not going to get into it, but like gross things were done with them to the poor woman's body. This was a satanic ritual murder. Okay, like there's no way around it. You know, and Berkowitz, like, how did he have all his knowledge of that? You know, and later, decades later, like in like 2012, they finally got a DNA match, and the guy who it matched to, he was you know, a guy who'd been a Stanford employee, not a professor, but you know, in some capacity, like some research type, and he part-time, like he was like a night watchman on the campus too. But literally, when the police went to serve a warrant, he shot himself in the head, like in his, you know, so I mean, that's bizarre, man. Like, even like everything about it, you cannot just say this is just like, I mean, yeah, okay, I'm the first person to point out that like there's idiotic inferences drawn from stuff like the JFK assassination or other stuff, but you know, when you're talking about, you know, when you're talking about the Scientology thing, the Process Church, you know, Parsons, Crowley, the, you know, the Manson thing, the Berkowitz murders, like, you can't, there's not another interpretation here, you know, like the other interpretation is that like all these people are just lying and somehow, you know, confabulating connections to each other for no reason to make themselves look more guilty, and like that doesn't make any sense. But yeah, no, I go ahead. I just wanted to insinuate that about the Arliss Perry thing.
no, that was pretty much all I had to say about it. Unless we want to get into the Aquino stuff now, or we
Yeah,
want
I
to wait
wanted
for
to
that.
dive into Aquino. I mean, that's the
Okay.
weirdest. The thing
Yeah.
about Aquino to me, and I'll turn it over to you in a minute, but you know, Aquino was he was pretty ubiquitous on the talk television circuit, and because in the 80s and very early 90s, you know, these idiots like Geraldo, you know, he did a whole like 2-hour special on like Satanism, and Aquino. I don't know if Aquino appeared on that one, but Aquino was like all over the place, you know, looking like, you know, like dressed up like Mr. Spock, like acting like some spooky gothic villain or something. Like it was really bizarre. I mean, beyond the fact that on its face, it's bizarre for a military officer to be acting that way. But it's almost like they were putting him out there deliberately to act like a buffoon, so people would be like, "Oh, this is just some guy who, you know, has kind of like strange hobbies. There's nothing sinister here. He's just, you know, kind of like a fucking jagoff." I mean, it yeah, so I mean, like, because it like begs the question. It's like, why, even if this guy wasn't doing anything criminal, like, why would they keep him around? It's terrible for PR. You know, like this idiot running around like talking about how he's a Satanist and he's into black magic. Like, I mean, that's, even if you just run like a mid-sized like law firm, you wouldn't want some guy like that running around. Like, let alone like, you know, I think he was I think Aquino was I think he retired as lieutenant colonel. I can't remember. I mean, I realize that in army intelligence, especially you know, post 73, you had a lot of like real losers, you know, like in the ranks. But that's really, really weird. And yeah, I believe I can't say for sure, but I mean, you've obviously moved in those circles, and I have not. But I there seems to be a glut. I mean, not to the degree of Aquino, but there seems to be a glut of guys who get into like really weird occult bullshit, like while they're in the service, or like that's when they get turned on to it. So this definitely seems to be like a government subculture. I mean,
You have no idea.
No, go ahead,
Let
please.
me. In case people who are listening don't already know, I kind of come from the intelligence world, so these are kind of the circles I've moved in. I am actually a literal Fed, so, talking about a Kino, right? And I've met a couple of Kino types, not like, as you say, not obviously to the level of like insanity and like almost caricature that a Kino could be described as, but like you will have these really fucking larpy types. These guys who come in, intelligence attracts weirdos. I mean, I don't know what it is, but intelligence just attracts weirdos. Like a buddy of mine had a story. His dad was a sergeant major, who had this one weird soldier, and he went into his locker and he found like a full size body doll with the sergeant major's name on it with a bunch of knives stuck in it, right? So
Yes.
this is what you need to have in your mind when you're thinking about the average person in the intelligence community. But the funny thing about Aquino, right, personally, his career is, fucking weird. So yeah, he was quote unquote special forces in Vietnam, like, and this is in heavy quotation. This guy
He's
wasn't
a
a Green
rogue, yeah.
Beret. Yeah, this guy wasn't out like, doing the real stuff. This guy wasn't fucking stacking skulls. He was outside of, Vietnamese villages playing ghost sounds on, loudspeakers to spook them. That's what he was doing.
Right.
And he probably never went under fire in his life. You're right. He did retire as a lieutenant colonel. He started off, I think, in the intelligence, but he then later went into the nascent U.S. Army PSYOPs Corps,
Right.
right, which is a branch of special forces.
Yeah, and it's under public affairs too. Like it's yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, so special forces. There are two weird parts of special forces, at least in the Army, and that's PSYOPs and civil affairs. And PSYOPs
Civil
is
affairs,
kind of,
yeah.
yeah, civil affairs. They're like the State Department in uniforms, but PSYOPs is like they're the guys who are sitting there thinking up schemes of how to implement fourth generation warfare. You know,
Right.
before we get into Kino's relation with like the Presidio scandal, which ties into all of the satanic stuff. Him and General, was he a general at the time? No, yeah, he was. Yeah. Paul Valley, right? So
Okay.
Paul Valley or Valley, I don't know how to fucking say his name, but he was this general at the time. He was an infantry. Valley was the real deal. He was an infantry guy, actually fucking fought, got shot at, did the stuff. But him and Aquino got together because they were both, in the PSYOPs Corps in the 80s. And they released this really weird pamphlet that later got turned into a series of books called "From PSYOP to Mind War." And
Right.
it's this early kind of sort of fourth generation warfare. This Chinese unrestricted warfare. Everything is a weapon. The best way to win war is to completely destroy your opponent's will to win war in the first place. But in this, like, Aquino is saying stuff. When I read through this pamphlet, I never read through his book, but I read through his pamphlet about, I think 15 pages. And he says stuff like, this will end war for all time, and we will never have suffering and all this, like this weird stuff, which I think ties into this kind of satanic thing, this concept of ending war.
Yeah, it's like end of history bullshit. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is not just innocuous. I think this is really like, because war actually, I think, brings around certain good things. But in the 80s, the thing that ties him into the topic of this evening is the Presidio sexual abuse scandals, right? So these occurred in the late 80s, early 90s, and for those in the audience who haven't heard of the scandal, because it was kind of reported on, but it kind of got hushed up really quick. So in the military Presidio of San Francisco, like several other military installations, there's a daycare on base where soldiers and their families can leave their children when they go off and do work. So what was happening at the daycare at the military Presidio of San Francisco is that some of these children were being taken away specifically by Aquino and other people with Aquino, and satanic rituals were performed. They were taken into another room with a satanic altar in it in the daycare, and acts were performed, right? And this was proven. I hate to say this, but there was physical evidence with the
Yeah.
children to prove this. So this
And these
was
little
a
kids
real thing.
ID'd. I'll add too, and then I'll give it back to you. These little
Yeah.
kids didn't just ID Aquino as the man who victimized them. They described the interior of his house, and how would they have any idea what Aquino's house looked like? Yeah. So I mean, this was not just so that people understand. This wasn't a case of some crazy lady saying like, "Oh, my kid was abused by Satanists," or some poor kid with emotional problems, making up some story that wasn't verified. Like these kids tested, came up sick with sexually transmitted diseases, and they had soft tissue trauma to their private areas, and they identified Aquino and described things like the interior of his house. I mean, that if that's not probable cause, I don't know what is. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that just, so apparently this wasn't reported in most outlets, but I had guys that knew people who served around that time, and apparently this was actually known to be going on for months, if not years, before it broke out. It was reported to the MPs on base, right? The MPs investigated this before, but like botched it and didn't like purposely. Matter of fact, it wasn't even the MPs that botched it. It was the MPs that were going in because they didn't know any of this, but they were told by higher up. They were told by higher, ranking people on the base to completely drop this, right?
And
And
the only guy who went down. There was some guy who was like a known pedophile. Like he had previous convictions for sex offenses, and he'd been like a pastor, like a youth pastor. He was a civilian, and he actually got indicted. But he was the only. I got to double check my facts. But he was the only man he was the only indictment that came out of this, and he was not a serviceman. And he like I said, he had a history of this kind of conduct. Like I don't know if he'd hidden that or if his background check didn't reveal it, but what I'm getting at is that this civilian chomo was basically the fall guy here, and like Aquino just wasn't. There was just it wasn't even a nollie process. Like Aquino wasn't even arrested. He was like questioned by the police, and he claimed that like this is slander, and I've done nothing wrong. This is just a witch hunt. But yeah, there was probable cause in droves, man, to proceed against them. Yeah, go ahead.
And I've been talking for a little while. I just want to present this one last piece of info before I throw it back to one of you two. Is that when the city of San Francisco got involved, and there was going to be a civilian police investigation of this daycare on base, right? The night before the police were supposed to investigate the daycare was torched. The police did a civilian investigation. The civilian investigation ruled it arson. The military investigation ruled it an accident off of a broken wire, right? So, this, and that was very convenient. This happened several times in several different cases where you had these like satanic scares, and it wasn't just at the Presidio. Like arson that burned the evidence of all this did occur in other places, right? And reported abuses of children on the bases wasn't limited to the military Presidio of San Francisco. It occurred at West Point at the same time. It occurred at Fort Riley, Kansas at the same time. It occurred at Fort Hood and Fort Bliss. There were reports at Fort Stewart, at the Pentagon. Right. This was reported everywhere, right? And it's easy to sort of hand wave and dismiss this. Oh, this was a massive scare, and no, I don't think it's the case.
Well, it's also something I mean, this is such a horrible topic. I mean, it's not anything people like to think about, but the fact of the matter is, thankfully, pedophilia, like actual pedophilia, people assaulting little children, that's not a particularly common that's not a particularly common impulse. Like even if people, like I'm saying, like even evil people generally, it's like not something they're into. There's something very strange about this popping up again and again on military facilities. Like it's not. It's just not this like epidemic thing. I mean, particularly in those days. And I'm not even saying because I mean, America's been incredibly morally compromised. And I'm the first to make the point that pornography is quite literally a form of propaganda, and it's absolutely devastated people's inner moral core and their sexual morality. But the fact of the matter is, like, most people, even evil people, like, are just not attracted to little kids. You know, I mean, so the fact of the matter is, it's like, what are the odds of there just being this kind of like critical mass of like pedophiles in the 80s, like hanging around military bases? That doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. I don't have some kind of like overarching theory about that, other than that, yeah, obviously there's some very, very disturbing subcultures and literal cults around in and around, you know, the military and every other aspect of government. But I've played with the idea, and I don't like to think in these terms, but I mean, one of the things we do as revisionists is we confront things that we may find revolting and existentially horrible. You know, I can foresee some really, really, really sick Mossad or U.S. intel type saying to himself, like, you know, can we fracture a human psyche to the point that, you know, the person could literally split and, you know, into different personages like this, you know, that I don't think that's possible. But for a long time, a lot of psychologists, like, this was the focus of their research, you know, multiple personality disorder. Like, you know, could that kind of thing be created? And if you could create that, you know, and if you could condition these people, like, you know, to carry out certain acts, you know, when one personality was dominant over others, and then there'd be no memory of those actions, because the memories of activities, you know, of each personality would be discrete and self-contained. That would have some very, that'd be a very effective way of manipulating people. It's kind of like the zenith of mind control. Okay, and if the way to accomplish that is through torturing people, well, you know, you kind of, the ultimate torture would be to like assault a little kid repeatedly in that way, like in concert with, you know, psychological conditioning in order to cultivate behavior patterns that you want. So there's that. And secondly, I you know, a lot of these really grotesque things that you find in like ancient kind of mystery cults, like the guy who I can't remember his name, but one of the guys Ed Opperman always has on, who's kind of like a cult expert. He makes the point that in some of these truly bizarre, like ancient cults in like Tibet and things, you'd find these ritual practices where guys would do things quite literally, like, you know, saving of urine and then forcing themselves to drink it, because if you can overcome like revulsion, you can somehow like transcend your physical body, you know. And if you can kind of like shatter your own like inner moral core, then, you know, you're liberated from fear and anxieties of living. And, you know, you're also freed from, you know, the inner witness of one's own conscience, and you can like do whatever you want. I mean, this is all very sick, okay, just like in visceral terms as well as in moral terms. But, you know, I can also see, if you have some kind of cultist, you know, like, what's the ultimate like taboo that is revolting to any remotely civilized person? That would be like, you know, indecently assaulting children. You know, so I don't want to believe that kind of thing goes on, but I mean, for that purpose. But what other conclusion can you draw? You know, I mean, these people are doing this for some reason. I mean, yeah, I realize if you're a pederast, it's because you're an evil fuck and you're an animal, and it's a compulsion, I would assume. But it, like I said, the concentration of this kind of thing on at places like the Presidio in the 80s, that seems more than coincidental to me. And I'm the last person who wants to put some kind of shine on conspiracy theories and then that kind of thinking that gives rise to that kind of shit. But I don't really think that we can dismiss that outright. I just don't. I'm gonna dip into the restroom, and I promise it'll be my last interruption here.
No, yeah.
I didn't mean to take this into like a dark ass fucking. I tried to make these streams like kind of fun and a little bit lighthearted. And I hope people aren't like totally disgusted and like put off by. I'm sorry, man, if like that was too kind of grim and gross. But I do think it's an important topic. You know, I hope that people haven't like fled the fucking premises. In the chats.
Actually, no, it's grown.
Okay.
I will tell you, the simping for Lady of Shalott in the comments needs to stop immediately. No, don't worry about it. No, but the funny thing about Aquino.
Anyway, I'll be right back, man. Like, yeah. But go ahead. Don't by all means like keep. Yeah.
Yeah, Aquino. After the whole Presidio stuff, he went and founded the Temple of Set, which he was part of the Church of Satan, founded by this fucker named Anton LaVey. Who was just, these were all LARPy types, but Aquino basically thought that LaVey was a LARPer and was stupid and wasn't doing stuff, so he founded the Temple of Set, which is like the Temple of Satan but worse, or the Church of Satan rather, but worse, and they follow. And I don't know much about either organization because I've never fucking, had the desire to look into these sort of weird, Crowleyite type stuff. If you ask me personally, I think they serve lesser demonic entities, really. But, Aquino also, towards the end of his life, fucking blew his own brains out. Towards the end of it, like a couple of years ago, I think he lived into like the late 2000s, but like no one really reported on his death. I think I don't know what it was. Maybe I don't know. I can't tell you why he did it. Part of me thinks it's because he realized that his life was a failure and he's an absolute terrible person. There's only one way out of that. But Aquino's career did kind of get soft ended because of this. Like, they kept him on staff, they kept his commission because of the Presidio, but like they didn't promote him. And as a matter of fact, I think the reason they didn't remove Aquino was because he was kind of a useful sort of scarecrow, if you will, like a target dummy, like this clown that they could point to and say, look at how idiotic this guy is. Like, we keep him around because we keep him around, but like, this is, look at how much of a fool this guy is to keep sort of heat off of the rest of the military high command, which was undoubtedly engaging in stuff like this. But I've been talking for a hot minute. Ace, do you have any knowledge on the Aquino stuff, or anything you want to add? Anything that you've gotten from this?
Not on that specifically. I would like to say that I think this is a very American thing, if I could say, because as far as the crime and the cultural degradation, as we know, America projects its worst aspects onto the rest of the world. So if we were going to compare, like, I know a lady was talking about the kind of like British counterpart or the UK counterpart to a lot of this like American weirdness. I think it's kind of starts in America. I can't really verify that, but there seems to be more incentives in an American climate compared to and again, because I don't know much about the UK's youth culture outside of music, but I would be curious to know if, I mean, you do have like Jack the Ripper, so, but like the idea that America kind of has this tolerance for all this kind of like secular culture, maybe that kind of paves the way for a lot of this stuff, if I could make a guess.
There's a weird there's occultic subcultures in the UK that's actually really strange. And I mean that Savile, Jimmy Savile, that's a lot more sinister even than I think what we're talking about in terms of its implications. It's the UK and the US mirror each other, man, in weird ways. Like, I was thinking about that. I was talking to my dad. Like, I'm not going off topic. I promise it's contextual. But I've got more respect for John Major than most people do, and compared to Maggie Thatcher, and compared to fucking Tony Blair, who's like Austin Powers meets fucking Bob Cratchit meets a pile of sentient dog shit. He looks like a prince. But in any event, John Major was like literally he was like some weird counterpart to like Bush 41. And I mean, you see this a lot with British prime ministers and U.S. presidents, and I mean, even to this day, like deluded as both cultures are, and captivated as both are by a hostile alien minority, and the deepest power corridors that remains. I take your point, but I think that I think there's parallels in this regard too, and I think I think the origins of this kind of deviancy, there may be some common sources. Like I'm not talking about. I'm not suggesting like Freemasons or fuck kids and that's where it all comes from. I mean, because that's I know that's what the inference people are going to draw. I've got nothing to say about Freemasons, but that's not what I'm saying.
They were the Wasp Mafia.
Well, the Peckerwood Mafia is the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah, that was the plebeian one. Yeah, but
that's the Wood Mafia, and I'm cool with that.
They work together like the Knights of Columbus and the Jesuits did.
Yeah,
yeah. You've got to have a high and a low. But yeah,
I hate those fucking like jagoff fraternal organizations, like for all kinds of reasons. But the Klan of history is dope. I'm not talking about its current incarnation, and but yeah, no, the old school Klan was fucking tight, man. And if people don't like that, they can go fuck themselves because I don't care. But the old movie The Wicker Man with Edward Woodward, he was in the whole show The Equalizer. Neither guys remember that. The Equalizer was a dope ass show like in the 80s, but the original Wicker Man, there's this awful remake that became like a meme with Nicolas Cage going like, "Not the bees," like like everybody's seen that. But the original Wicker Man is it's got Christopher Lee also, the Hammer horror guy who's also Count Dooku in Star Wars. But Count Dooku ain't shit compared to Jar Jar Binks, by the way. But
true, very
Count
true.
Dooku is the best character in Star Wars.
Yeah. Darth Binks is the fucking king. But
that's a separate show, independent show.
Yeah, we'll deep dive into Jar Jar Binks in another program. But
another right Hegelian. So
yeah, exactly. But the original Wicker Man is like a serious film, and it's about the kind of interfaith tension between like atavistic paganism, like true like paganism. I'm not talking about like fags in their mom's basement, like I hate Jesus because he's a dirty Jew and I'm a Viking, and like, Mom, where's my grilled cheese sandwich? Like, I mean, like actual like atavistic like pagan impulses and like ancient cultures, like and the kind of tension between that and like the rational, the triumph of reason and logos over that kind of savagery and mystery called atavism. Like, it's a very good treatment of that, and it's a creepy movie. And I think, I mean, obviously, like that's like a gothic horror movie, and it's like on the nose. And like, I'm not saying that like, oh, and like you go to rural England. I've actually been to rural England, however, but I'm not saying like that's what it's like. But I'm saying like what it's riffing on, and like it's like a real thing, even if it's not like nearly that on the nose. Like, obviously the shit like portrayed in that movie is not actually happening, but you know what I mean. So that's an interesting topic. What are people in the comments saying?
There was one question, and this was via Twitter, and it kind of goes with you cited Jones earlier, who I can't recommend enough. And he was asking, wait a second, having some boomer tech here. He was asking about one sec. So Thomas about libido dominandi. And sort of the sexualized culture that we've been desensitized to. I was watching an interview, I think it was 1987, talking about, does pop culture tolerate the worst aspects of freedom of expression? And they were implying that maybe music was the new pornography. But the idea that, the fact that Larry Flint won that case, I mean, back in like the 80s, that's something very groundbreaking. The fact that something like that could happen. And
well, it's also what's fundamental that people don't get, like even otherwise smart people, like what happened in America is that freedom of speech was basically abolished and obscenity was decriminalized. So they replaced freedom of speech with obscenity. So you can't you can't, your kid can't. They replace freedom of speech and free exercise with the decriminalization of obscenity. That's the trade off. It's like, okay, you can't. You can't. Speaking of the Klan, like you can't actually start a Klan chapter and hold events, in common with your membership, but you can go watch like hardcore pornography, like in those days. Now you can just like download as much as you want, and your kid can't like pray in school, but you can download gigabytes of like girls, getting like sodomized, like to your heart's content, or you can yeah. So I mean that's what like this idea that it's like I'm not just like invoking a metaphor, like the idea that obscenity is speech at all, like that's got no precedent, and but that's like a common thing. That was also like what underlies Roe v. Wade. Like Roe v. Wade's like it's a eugenics decision. It owes to Malthusian anxieties. It owes to a a coalition of Jews and progressives, like assaulting the white family. It's all those things, but it was also, in addition to being this kind of sociological screed that the reasoning of which is rather tortured, Roe v. Wade's premised on Amendment 4, and it was decided the same year the war on drugs was declared. So it's like, okay, you no longer have rights against search and seizure, but you can get an abortion. This was very deliberate. It's like for every enshrined constitutional right that was just totally done away with or revoked, something was given in its stead, but like what replaced it was something that was entirely bad, and it was either like a vice and a destructive like evil passion, like dressed up as a liberty, like the like the freedom to consume pornography or to like go to like a gay bathhouse or something, or it was something totally destructive, like yeah, well, now the cops can search your person and like turn your house over and like rip your car apart anytime they want, and under the auspices of drug control, but hey, like if you're a lady, you can go get an abortion and no one will bother you about it. That's not an accident. It's not a coincidence, and it's not that like, oh, these were revolutionary times and in terms of social paradigm shifts, so that they're these issues just kind of dovetailed and were decided simultaneously. That's not the case. This was very purposeful. It was the trade-off, and that so Americans like literally sold their soul, and that's really fucked up because it was basically above board, and people who should have known better like went along with it, and that's what's grotesque. But I don't want to go too far afield. I'm gonna wrap this up fairly soon on my end because I got my dad's going out of town again, so I'm doing Easter stuff with him tomorrow, which is dope. But I gotta wake up early and like cook some stuff, and I'm gonna help out. Like he and I are both gonna like help out at my church. I mean, I'm getting him into church, which is dope. But yeah, I want to field a few more questions, and I'm probably gonna bounce.
Yeah, we got one $10 question for you, Thomas. I
Yes.
also just want to mention what you just said. Robert Bork, who people probably remember.
Yeah,
from the
Bork
big
was
movie.
an interesting guy, man.
He talked about that in Slouching Towards Gomorrah, and I'll even throw in like Tipper Gore's book, raising PG kids in an X-rated world. I mean,
Yeah.
just to get some insight on that whole front, I think people would be surprised how much these people were kind of like the Buchanans of the '80s prior.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah. No, Bork was an interesting guy.
Oh,
But yeah,
okay.
what's the question?
What is Thomas's opinion on the McMartin preschool and accusations? And what's funny is Oliver Stone made a movie about this with James Woods, the McMartin trial. And
Right.
he
Yeah.
implies the elite like eyes wide shut theory, and he just kind of throws that in the movie. So it's kind of interesting.
There's a few yeah, I don't know enough about it to provide some kind of like overarching take. I do believe something happened there. Okay, like in my opinion, it's obvious something happened there. But the state's primary witness was a lady who was suffering alcoholic dementia and had a history of filing false claims to the police or filing false police reports owing to paranoia. And the kid or the son. He wasn't a kid. He was of age. But the McMartins were total fucking weirdos, and like their son, he was the one most implicated in the indictment. I think he probably was railroaded. Like, don't get me wrong, he was a fucked up weirdo and he did weird ass shit. Like, he'd be like flipping through Playboy magazines and stuff, like on the premises of the preschool. But I don't believe he was out and out raping kids. I think he was the fall guy or something very sinister. Okay, I mean, but I'd have to deep dive more into it. But the whole thing was bizarre, and the fact that it dragged on for so long, endlessly, like that. I mean, it's just, the whole thing is just incredibly strange. But that's I believe something happened there, and a lot of this was substantiated. You know, the quote unquote tunnels. I mean, there were underground passages there. You know, like a lot of this bore out. You know, like this in that can't be denied. So, but I'd have to deep dive. I'd have to deep dive into the evidence and the record.
Yeah, thank you, 85 for the $10. I appreciate it. So
Yeah,
so
no,
yeah.
thank you for supporting Ace's channel. He's a hardworking man, and I'm not just being funny or putting shine on him because he's my friend. Like I both of the fellows here, I owe them a lot. I'm an old guy who's weird and kind of not great with like the practical side of producing stuff. Like even stuff that doesn't require moving mountains, like fucking live streams or like a podcast. Like I'm not good at it. So you should support Ace anyway, but the more you support him, like, you know, keep in mind that like he basically does like the work of two people because he like does my shit too because I'm too fucking retarded to do it. But go ahead. Anything
Yeah,
else?
I just wanted to ask you, Thomas, I was
Yeah,
watching this roundtable discussion with John Carpenter, and
yeah,
he was talking about how someone on that roundtable type panel was saying how the '80s standard for movies, violence was allowed due to the Cold War consensus, and sex was discouraged because it syncs up with the family value standard. And I was wondering, that's might be, speculation, but the idea that you have that kind of a pop culture basically controlled by a managerial elite. I
yeah.
know.
I think that's true, and that was a common refrain really until the early '90s. People would say like, "Oh, you know," particularly like the lifestyle left because they like think with their dick. You know, they're always like, "Oh, America tolerates violence, but you know, not sex." You know, that's you bunch of fascists. I mean, I I mean, yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. Like in Carpenter, even though Carpenter became like a broke ass like idiots, like after like literally like the bottle like ruined his mind or something. But I disagree with the reasons why people posit that that is the case, that paradigm, but that like was the paradigm. You know, like it like American movies in the '80s, like yeah, like violence was just like okay. Even like PG movies, like they you know there'd be like people getting like fucking shot to pieces, and but you couldn't, you know, you like when you show like a girl's breasts, it's like, oh, you know, that's not, you know, hide your children's eyes. Like I mean, I don't know, I don't think like nudity is a big deal though. Like you might notice like even in the fucking hot weather, I wear sleeves. I'm kind of like an uptight fucking prod, but I, uh, you know, when like on my timelines on my timeline and on my platforms, you know, like I'll post like nude shots of like fine ass girls, and like some guys will be like, "Oh, I thought you were a Christian." It's like, yeah, man, like there's nothing wrong with like liking girls. Like that's not like gross or like porny or something. Like, so I'm probably more like I do kind of see what the Europeans are getting at. Like, it's weird how Americans think like nudity is like fucking like bad or something. Like, it's not. There's nothing wrong with it in context. Like pornography is fucking disgusting, but like nudities, they got nothing to do with pornography. But yeah, yeah. But
Yeah,
yeah, the Carpenter or whoever on that panel said that, he is right. I just, like I said, I just disagree with the fucking proximate causes of what they'd identify as that. I'll take one more, then I'm going to bounce.
and obviously, people really take advantage and drive it to excess. The like turning nudity into like Titus is something I
Yeah,
definitely
yeah,
recommend,
yeah, yeah.
stuff like
No,
that.
very, very true.
Um, yeah, I don't know if we have any more. Of course, anyone's always welcome to.
Yeah, no, it's dope. I don't want people to feel like they're being ignored if there's something really pressing.
Oh, one sec. There was some something at the top that wasn't a super chat.
But you two guys go as long as you want, man. Like, don't
Oh, one sec.
don't think you gotta close up for the night just because I'm being an old person and like retiring from the discussion. But again, too, and I'm not just being polite. I really appreciate you fellas taking the time to do this with me. I really like these Friday streams, man.
Of course.
And I think we get some really great discussions going.
Oh, boomer on. What do we got here? Take on Fort Bragg.
Damien De La Fuente in the comments, dude. You have no idea how many deaths that there have been at Fort Bragg. Like when you say the deaths on Fort Bragg, you got to narrow it down. Like they're army bases are like murder factories, dude. Like
yeah, that's the impression I get. Fort Bragg's got a particularly nasty history too. I mean, there's like a Jeffrey McDonald, like he murdered his family, and then there was that Timothy Hennis case, which is a bizarre case, and there's all kind of there's as a matter of law, like there's some very interesting issues presented relating to dual sovereignty and stuff. But
yeah, in 2002, four wives like of four different servicemen got murdered in like
Jesus
the
Christ.
same way, like overkill, like stabbed like 70 plus times.
Yeah. No, I've got that's the impression I've gotten is that there's something. Yeah, even in like in peacetime, especially like that's not normal.
And they're murder factories. I mean, yeah, they're murder factories because it's like the kind of people that get attracted to the service are the kind of people who are like mentally unstable somewhat in the first place. And then you give them a whole bunch of military training and weird stresses that you normally wouldn't get, even in like a garrison environment.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're working 18-hour days. You combine this with like PTSD and
tolerance of alcoholism and the military culture.
Holy shit. Like I'm sure there's other service guy. I know I'm not going to name him, but I know there's one other service guy in the comments who can tell like it's a fucking normal to just abuse that shit on bases. They're all Toddman 67, you're completely correct. They are also adultery dens because it's almost like it's almost like if you take a bunch of men and their wives and you put them together in a fucking pressure cooker, it's almost like a perfidy will occur. Yeah.
No, I get it. Yeah. No, I mean that's fucked up. I wasn't making light of it.
No. Yeah, but it is the
actually,
norm, though. It is.
There's a disproportionate amount of military guys and vets like in our thing and on my platforms who are like great friends. I don't want people to I put shade on the military because I think the military establishment is entirely fucking perverse. Like I do every other aspect of the federal regime. I'm not like saying nasty things about guys in the enlisted ranks and stuff. I mean, I would hope people realize that, but I just want to clarify that.
It was the Obama purges that really made it bad. Like it was kind of sort of, you had competent leadership that was like caring about what the military became above the level of 03. But after the Obama purges, like the military went from bad to worse.
Oh yeah, the other fellows have told me the same thing, and I'm gonna trust you guys implicitly anyway. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, gentlemen, I think I'm gonna raise up. Again, I can't thank you enough for doing these streams with me. I'll hit both you fellows up tomorrow after my Easter festivities are kind of done, and next week let's record Mind Phaser Monday or Tuesday if you fellows are down.
Roger that.
Yeah, hell yeah. All right, you guys are the best, man. All right, and thank you, cool people, for dipping in here and participating.
Thomas, you forgot to shill. You forgot to shill. You need to shill.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I think everybody knows where like my shit's at. Like, check out Paul's podcast. which is dropping imminently. And he and I just recorded. It's dope. Its focus is Americana, all things Americana. He and I focused on Chicago and the Midwest more generally. But it's not just hot takes. It's really kind of documenting deep culture of an indigenous organic nature in North America. And that's important. I mean, not just to people like me and Paul, who got deep roots here, but it's important to anybody in our thing, because this is where we're situated, for better or worse. Even if you don't have deep roots here, because you're basically newcomer stock, which is fine. You just in terms of understanding, the political culture and what we're facing, you really do need to have a grasp of this stuff. So. Plus, Paul's just a dope individual, and his content is compelling. So yeah, keep up with Paul's podcast, and like I said, I'm gonna link everybody directly whenever he drops new content. But of particular interest to me is that he was kind enough to invite me to record with him on the pilot episode, which is a great honor. And so be looking out for that. I'll make sure that everybody knows how to find it. And that's all I got for right now. Cool people. All right, I am out for real now.
Have a good night, Tyler.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, man. All right.
I meant for him to shill his stuff, but he spent 15 minutes shilling my stuff, so it looks like I'm not even going to bother doing it.
No, fair enough, man. Fair enough.
Oh shit. Anything else that the chat? Anything else that the chat's brought up?
Yeah, just someone specifically wanted us to keep going, and we will continue a little bit here.
Yeah, we'll go for a bit. Damien, my man, I will tell you, you're talking about these deaths on Fort Bragg. Like, if you can give me a name of the specific cases, then I can probably give you my take on it. I was at Bragg for a decent amount of time. It's probably the base I'm the most familiar with. Yeah, it's not just that, but it's Fort Bliss is pretty bad. Like all the Texas bases are bad too. Shit Fort Hood's fucking terrible, dude. To the point where it's there's stuff to the point where they're getting served rancid food that's rotted and staying in barracks that are falling apart with black mold and stuff. So yeah, the United States military, and it's always been kind of poor. Right, it's always been kind of no one goes into the military expecting good quality stuff, but it's at the same time it's yeah, there's just a certain level of I don't even know how to say it. It's there's a certain level of degradation that's occurred within the military infrastructure. And you can tie this, you really can tie this to around the time where these sort of Aquino types, these kind of cults in the military high command started gaining prevalence. I really do think that there's a kind of incompetency that comes with that kind of person. I don't know if you agree with me, Ace, but just in general, these sort of pederasts seem to be very incompetent people, on top of the fact that they're the epitome of evil.
Oh, Marshall Forward with $4.99. Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Happy Good Friday, gentlemen. That's right. Happy Good Friday. Of course. One sec here. Well, I was also curious again to more of an open question, but it does seem like there was a lot of sympathy from what would now be the boomers and the what would be classified as alarmists, but it seemed like the elites in the 80s were at least sympathetic to us, or I mean, I don't know if you want to say one of us, but at least kind of closer to the rest of the population in terms of values. And I was just wondering, in the 90s, when you have this excess, this powder keg of cultural decline, basically in free fall, I was just curious if do you think there is sort of that cooperation between the elites and everybody else in the 80s, or is that me kind of projecting a little bit here?
I think the 80s are a difficult time to kind of classify, because you have you have this kind of image this sort of nostalgia that coats the 80s. But it's not just that. It's like it really was kind of a mini golden age with Reagan and all that. But I don't think the elites were quote unquote with us in the 80s. I think that the 80s fit the vision that the elites had for that period of time. And in the decades following, I think those elites that were running things in the 80s, the factions at least of elites that were running things in the 80s, I think got replaced by other factions, or some of those factions changed their priorities. So when you're thinking about this in the terms of like the elites are with us or not with us, that's not really the terms you should be thinking in. It's more of in like it's more of a what benefits the elites. The elites only they only do anything if it benefits them in some way, right? Whether it's for their own personal rocks off or for actual like cultural and political power. So I think it benefited the elites in the 80s, or whatever elites were in charge, to have the 80s kind of be like how they were.
Yeah, you are right to emphasize that language. That I think you're right. That is important. And I I remember Academic Agent made a point that, like, obviously what we're seeing now is the elites are understanding that liberal democracy is what benefits them the most. And so to compare that with like the Thatcher Reagan model, which is kind of this hyper free market type rhetoric, that's it's probably just the models are changing over time, not so much the sympathies. Yeah, I think that's a better way of putting it. You're right. Um, what is I want to pronounce your name right. Watan 005 with $5. Thank you so much, man. Evening, gents. Happy Easter. Thank you. You too.
Voton 005. Is that?
It looks like a W.
No, it's Voton. That might be a buddy of mine. I don't know for a fact, but that might be someone I know.
You got to verify it in chat, my guy. You
Yeah,
gotta.
but Oscar Toe was asking about if I see any similarities in the 80s panic with Satanists and the neo-Nazi panic. And on that, I think the tactic is the same. Yes, I think they're using the media, at least, is using the same tactics that they used in the 80s. However, I think the roles have been reversed. So instead of in the 80s, when there was a semblance of social norms and morality, even if it was a corrupt semblance. Okay, yeah, it Voton 05 is who I think it is. But yeah, to Oscar's question, I think it's just this sort of Masonic reversal which has occurred, in which it is the social deviants who have the capital, that is turning people and making them see monsters under the bed of what you would consider normal, well functioning, and really social people on the otherwise. Like this, the term neo-Nazi, the term racist, and all of that is used to make what used to be considered normal, what used to be considered a healthy individual, now it's used to make them seem like they're the epitome of evil. And this is why, small little aside, Ace, but you might agree with me on this. This is why I think we need to stop calling ourselves racists. We need to stop calling ourselves autists and all this, because we're just normal functioning people. Like a buddy of mine who lives in New Orleans has met, and I, me being in the South, I've met actual racists, and no one in the sphere is anywhere near on the spectrum. All of you have minorities in your Telegram chats, and all of you personally like at least a couple of tribesmen, for lack of a better word. All right, so look, oikophilia, and I'm kind of repeating the points that my friend made in his Telegram post, but oikophilia is not the same as xenophobia, right? So we just need to kind of start calling ourselves normal, like, because we are normal. We're the normal ones. They're the deviants. Yeah. They're the deviants. They're the ones who are trying to destroy everything.
That's right.
Anyway.
I think that's Scruton's word, right? The term that you used for
I don't know
phobia.
Scruton like that.
I thought I just recently read something like that. I was gonna mention how there is kind of a red pill in the fact that in the 80s they are admitting that the worst thing you can be is evil. That was the moral standard back then of the 20th century. And in the 21st century, it's these political ideologies. You know what I mean? So there is kind of a shift there. Obviously, that's probably not calculated, but the fact that you have that difference kind of says a lot about the political climate of both centuries. And Oh, thank you. Thank you, Big Brain Content. See, now that Thomas left, now we got all these questions. So I guess
Well,
your
I love the sound of my own voice. I'm happy to keep talking as long as I can talk.
all this IT. There you go. There you go. There you go. See, Oscar Toe, that's or Oscar. Paul, you were the one who corrected me on that. Yeah, it's Oscar, and that K was really throwing me off. But yeah, that's what we want. We want interaction. You know, it's not. This isn't a lecture. This is a stream. Very very distinct thing.
This is the American unpopular opinions. This is
That's
the Yankees' answer to the Brits getting together and being British, which
that's right. Yeah,
you know,
I
it's
didn't even
funny.
realize. Yeah, that is. We kind of unintentionally created another space in this whole sphere, of course. But yeah. What do we got here? What do we got?
Toddman67 is asking me if I've read probably something similar to a army pamphlet. I'm gonna Google that real quick. I have not read it, but it. I want to say that's reads a Marine Corps something pamphlet. I want to say just of my army acronym or my military acronyms. I'm gonna look that up though.
I also wanted
Actually,
to mention
no, go
because
ahead.
Thomas had a tweet that I'm sure you guys saw, and it's relevant to the topic because earlier he was talking about how people say this is alarmist, and the example I was going to use was Alex P. Keaton from Family Ties. That's kind of the caricature for the do-gooder of the '80s, Reagan shilling. But I mean, when you see stories like this, your first reaction should not be, you know, and that, like obviously Cawthorn is closer to the DC sphere than probably a lot of us. But I mean, when you see stories like this, it's one of those like you know, it's kind of like your Epstein awakening where you know every once in a while the media will have a story that kind of gets into the insider baseball of what's going on with the elite, and so of course stuff like this gets buried, but it's just it's very funny. And of course he uses the Nixon anecdote, how they were trying to like push women onto him to so that they could create a weakness with and again, this is stuff that most of us are aware of, but it's just I don't know how anybody could read this in 2022 and say that this is all crackpot theories that is reserved for the the weird websites that none
You
of us are
know,
supposed to go to.
in all honesty, the one thing I take away from this is that Cawthorn is a fucking loser. Like
Well,
that's my takeaway.
it's one of those things where like because all of us don't have let me fix the boomer tech. It's one of those things where like because we have no empirical evidence from our point of view of DC, it's all up in the air speculation, and yet when people from DC confirm it, once again people brush it off. So of course you can never win when talking about what goes on in DC. It's just one of those like uncharted territories for probably the majority of the population.
You know, I what else do you think I want my congressman doing other than being I want to make sure my congressmen are constantly awake and alert, right? Say what you will, all right, but I want the people in the halls of power to be doing what they need to do in order to run the country properly, all right? Look,
There you go. There you go. We got oh, sorry. Yeah, well, it's funny people say, how do men reduce themselves to depths like that? And it's like if you're in the elite, you're not your standards are not the same as everybody else, and that also applies to the vices. So obviously you're I was going to mention Steve Pinker earlier to bring up Epstein again. We're kind of living in Steve Pinker's America where you kind of have these salesmen just kind of pitching like entry level tier political takes, but then they'll I forgot what that book that academic agent reviewed, where he basically just doesn't understand human history at all. And the fact that you have that famous picture of him and Epstein, it just kind of says it all. You really don't have to you don't have to know anything else about Pinker when you have stuff like that floating around. So
Yeah.
um
Yeah, no, Pinker is very much part of that sort of AA's boomer truth sort of like yeah, like just I really do think there is something satanic to the idea of just stopping the clock and just like, if anything, the past 20 years, from about 2000 to about two to now, just all kind of seems to bleed together. It didn't really have any sort of feeling, right? And this is the time like where you and I, Ace, us being Zoomers rather, I almost said boomer there, but us being Zoomers, have experienced the most. And I really I think that this is kind of the fulfillment of this, satanic image, is to just stop everything, is this perpetual present without any sort of connection to the past or the future.
right.
Just a little thought I had.
No, that is kind of underreported, even though
Mm,
it's just one of those things that kind of gets chalked up in the general loose thoughts.
yeah,
But all right. All right. We'll
Damien.
we'll we'll wind down. We'll wind down here for the sake of the audience who's as Thomas would say, bored to tears, even though of course everybody likes the content, everybody's enjoying it. But well, Paul, I want you to chill because as Thomas said, he kind of did it for you, but I want you to get a double dose of some of your projects, man. I know you're about to be pretty busy here in a sec, so
Yeah. um I guess this is as good a place to show them as any. Before I start, Damien De La Fuente, I grew up in probably the largest concentration of federal agents in the entire world. I have so many glow in the dark experiences that I could probably do a whole stream on them. But so yeah, as Thomas said, I'm starting a podcast. It's an Americana podcast. It will be paid $5 a month for two podcasts a month. I'm doing it bi-weekly. Um, and that will, that's just to see uh, how interested people are in that sort of in that kind of content. But I'm really excited for it. Thomas and I had a very good conversation a couple of days ago, and I'm very excited to post it. All of y'all can follow my Substack and read it. paulfahrenheit.substack.com, and that's spelled as you see it on the screen. If you no, you don't see it on the screen. FAHRENHEIDT. It's the German spelling of it. I write a lot of stuff on America and Americana and the American mythos. That's kind of my wheelhouse, the thing I work with. And you can follow me on Twitter at CavKingPaul to see my lukewarm takes and my shameless retweeting of people with more followers than me. So yeah, I mean, that's all the shilling I really have. I was going to go on this big thing about my podcast, but Tom has beat me to it. So yeah, um, I
yeah,
mean
and he
that's
just
all I
said
got.
his Twitter, so we got that question too. So, all right, it is late here. Yeah, it's late here too. So, thank you everybody for tuning in. As always, another stop at the Double R Diner. We appreciate it. We appreciate Thomas, Paul, everyone in chat. Our two new mods, lady, bass guitarist and lady, and of course the uncombed boomer. All these, some regulars in here. Todd, man. Uh, I'm gonna forget some people, but I came, I saw, I cringed. Thank you for thank you for tuning in, Oscar to Spindly, David the Gnome, and some other favorites. Our
Yeah,
cast and crew, June.
yeah. Toddman, hit me up on Twitter, my man. If you're still here, hit me up on Twitter because you're dropping a whole lot of interesting shit that I want to keep reading about.
Yeah, Tuesday, FA Tuesday, K, and other notable cast
Oh,
members.
okay. I know who Kay is. Yeah, and I want to thank Votan005. You may text me as soon as we get off.
There we go. There we go. This is we do a little networking. It's called
Just a little bit. Just a little bit. No, but that's a real thing I tweeted about. Like, all of y'all in chat, if anyone who's still here, like, meet as many people that you trust that you can in real life. It really will change your perception of the world. It's great. Like the US event was fantastic, and I'm very excited for Ace to go to the next one.
That's right. That's right. I'm gonna have to stay tuned because it's looking good. Of course, Vingle and Douglas Edward, Big Brain. Thank you everybody for tuning in. I appreciate it as always. Whoops. I appreciate it as always. Thank you for stopping by and have a great rest of your weekend.